Hi, it's Amy Shaw, the Soul Whisperer here. I'm in my car today. I made 2 videos earlier at home, but I actually have a house full of people, so it's kind of hard for me to have private space. And I actually just got done with chemotherapy a few minutes ago. I came out to my car as my little band-aid on my port. So yeah, I made a video earlier this morning about suffering and shamanic initiation and how suffering is essential to the shamanic path. And here I am. I just had chemotherapy today. I've been in treatment for 15 years. So I definitely know a lot about suffering on all the levels, psychological, emotional, spiritual, absolutely physical, as I've been in cancer treatment for 15 years and I am considered uncurable. I'm metastatic and I'm a long-term, or what we call a lifer, in treatment. And so this is just a normal part of my life. I come here to the cancer center every 3 weeks and I sit down in the chemotherapy chair and I have my infusion of the chemotherapy drug. But that's not exactly what I want to talk about today. Hopefully the sound will come out okay. I am in my car. It is actually 111 degrees today in Austin, Texas. Very, very hot, so I have my air conditioner on. Hopefully that's not producing too much sound and you can hear me pretty clearly. But what I wanted to talk about today in this video is entity attachment. And the reason this has been coming up is because the last 6 people who contacted me have all contacted me with complaints of entity attachment, and they've all asked me to do extraction or removal. So, and interestingly, 3 of those have known diagnoses of schizoaffective disorder, and the other 3 probably likely some other type of diagnosis, official DSM mental health diagnosis, some type of psychosis. But 3 of them for sure, when I asked them if they had a mental health diagnosis, told me it was schizoaffective disorder. So that's just a little interesting side note to it. It's not necessarily how we think of things shamanically, but the correlation between 6 people showing up in my field wanting entity removal, saying that they had malevolent entity attachments, and then also having diagnoses of a schizoaffective disorder is quite interesting. But it's led me to want to talk about entity attachments, and so many people come to me for that, believing that they have entity attachment. So first of all, I want to make a distinction between all these different things, because a lot of people come and they have symptomology and they might initially think it is an entity. In actuality, I have also had people over the last 2-3 years that I've been in shamanic practice who have come to me believing that they had entity attachments, and in fact it wasn't an entity. What distinguishes an entity, to me, in my understanding of it, is an entity is actually a sovereign being. It has its own consciousness, it has its own will. It's separate from the individual that it is attacking or attaching to or oppressing or possessing. It's a distinct energy, a distinct consciousness, and it's self-driven. It has intention and motivation and compulsion. And it can influence the thoughts, behaviors, feelings of its target. So that is what an entity actually is. I guess in religious terms, we might call this demonic. If it's a malevolent entity, we would call it a demon or a demonic energy. Shamanically, we just tend to leave it more neutral and call it entities, because there can also be people who have died and they've gotten trapped in the middle world, and they can sort of attach to people as well. Particularly if they were alcoholics or drug addicts, or they had a lot of depression. You can get attachments of suicidal suffering spirits. You can get attachments of spirits that have a lot of hedonistic flesh cravings, and they can influence people to use drugs and alcohol, or to engage in indiscriminate sex, or all these kind of things. So there are a variety of entity attachments. It doesn't always necessarily have to be like a demonic, which is, conceivably in the Christian realm, we would call a demonic entity actually an angelic entity, which is different than a human being who's passed on and is kind of stuck in the middle world and then is attaching themselves energetically to another person. So there even among entity attachment, there's a wide range of that, of what that really is and what it can look like. Then you also have these sort of projected thought forms. These come out of the shadow. They're, you know, compelled by the shadow, and they're projected out. And then people perceive them as out projections. They perceive them back in as being separate or not part of themselves, when actually it is truly just an extension of themselves being projected out, and then you know, becoming the target and thinking, well, that's a negative thing that's separate from me. And sometimes these thought forms, these projected aspects of one's own shadow, can also sometimes seem like they have their own intention and their own personality. You know, they have maybe a distinct voice that the person experiences as a voice, or, you know, as having an internal dialogue, but they're perceiving the internal dialogue as actually coming from a source outside of themselves. So there's this sort of separation or dismemberment that's occurred. And so not all people that show up with entity attachments truly have the classic sense of an entity attachment. Sometimes it is a projected thought form, sometimes it is, you know, shadow impulse and things like that. So it's always the job of the shaman to sort of ferret that all out and see what you're really working with, because how you do the extraction, how you approach it, how you work with it is going to definitely depend on what it is that you're working with. But the thing that I really, really wanted to stress today in this video is to talk about what is a realistic expectation when you're looking for a shaman and you're wanting somebody to do this work. First of all, we kind of live in this North American microwave culture where everybody wants everything now, and they expect a miracle and they want it now. In traditional indigenous shamanic cultures, if you had somebody that came to you that was like in a full-on possession or a full-on oppression with demonic or malevolent entities, the shaman's not going to say, come into my hut, let me spend an hour with you and I'm going to completely cure you in an hour. It's just not going to happen. In some cultures, the people come and they actually literally live with the shaman for up to 2 weeks or a month at a time. The shaman will eat with the person, drink with the person, sleep with the person, hunt with the person. Like, every aspect of village life is intimately carried out in the presence of the shaman. That way the shaman can study, you know, spend the time, you know, get a good idea of what's really happening, and slowly do the work that needs to be done. So, you know, this expectation that you're going to go to a shaman, especially if you've been dealing with, you know, the last 6 cases that I've had have been incredibly hard. I'm talking about, okay, it's so hot that my phone keeps turning off saying it's too hot to record the video. So I have my air conditioner on, but if I turn it on full blast, I don't think you'll be able to hear me. So I'm trying to like be in the middle here. Anyway, what I was saying is that, you know, these people that are coming and expecting, you know, a 1-hour session to relieve decades of suffering and symptoms, it's not realistic. Realistically, extraction occurs, co-occurs with all sorts of other shamanic practices, such as soul retrieval, power retrieval, and all these kind of things. So it's meshed. There's no way to, like, it's not an a la carte service where you come and you say to a shaman, well, I only want a soul retriever, or I only want an extraction, or I only want, it doesn't tend to work like that. In my experience, it all sort of co-occurs together and simultaneously in this sort of like magical way of weaving it together. So it's a process that takes time, and prior to even being able to actually perform that function, there's some tending that has to occur, some things that have to be put in place. You know, the individual has to be brought to a place of being able to let go of the attachment and bring in the soul parts to fill up that space and reintegrate them. And so everything has to sort of be tilled and brought up around it and you know, prepared. There's preparation. And this takes time. It can take 1 session, 2 sessions, 3 sessions, multiple sessions. It really just depends, on the individual. And their resistance, a lot of times resistance will honestly come up, and that's a whole nother story. But what I want to really talk about as well is entity attachment and how it occurs. In some cases, it's a particular vulnerability that a person has because they have unresolved shadow work, which is basically like their unconsciousness. There's certain triggers that they're unconscious about, and these entities, whatever they are and whatever spectrum they are attracted to this, what we call the darkness. And so some of these people that are showing up, nobody shows up and says, I have an entity attachment, I want it removed, and the entity is like blessing them and bringing them health and wealth and happiness, and they're excited about it. No, that never happens. When people show up and they want shamanic work and they say I have an entity attachment, it's because they perceive some malevolent source external to them that's causing and creating havoc in their life, chaos, destruction, negativity, and then they have symptoms of that, whether that's, a psychiatric illness, it could be depression. A lot of times they hear voices that are telling them to self-harm or to harm other people, or they're very negative and downing to themselves and things like this. So they're suffering and they want relief from this. And so how does that happen, that a person becomes possessed or has an attachment, has something attached to them that's malevolent, that they don't like, that's unpleasant to them? So this can occur because of unresolved shadow stuff that's coming up, triggers that is attracting these kind of entities. It can result from drug use and opening oneself up. It can result from curses. I have one client, I won't give too many details about it, but it literally, the client was able to specifically identify that that my client had gone to see a psychic individual, and the psychic actually put in some demonic energy into a crystal, and then the client started having, all the symptoms and was very aware that this was happening, and went back to the psychic, and then the psychic sort of tried to say, well, I'll remove it for you, but I want X amount of money, and it was an incredible amount of money. The client didn't have the money, and so came to me, and this actually has been going on for 6 or 7 years. So sometimes it can be that as well, a psychic attack, or dark magician, a sorcerer that has power over you in some way, or you're giving power over to them in some way, and they instill or install these things to sort of use that to extort, or there's all kinds of different ways. Nothing actually really shocks me anymore when I hear the stories that people tell me about the lack of integrity that's out there in our world with other spiritual workers, and who really are dark magicians presenting themselves as being people of the light and wanting to help people in benevolence, and they really turn out to be dark sorcerers, dark magicians, and they cause harm intentionally to people. I hear it so often, so often. And that is a big part of my practice, is curse extraction, and just they're out there. So that's one aspect of it as well. It can be ancestral, some sort of ancestral trauma that hasn't been cleared, or there's just, I could spend days and days actually talking about how one becomes plagued by these things. But the real point that I want to make about it is that if you have an entity attachment and you're seeking shamanic help because you're consciously aware, this is the perception that you're having, this is your reality of your symptoms and how you're experiencing them, is that this is an entity attachment, it's a malevolent entity, and I'm seeking shamanic help because I want to get rid of it, then I am telling you right here, right now, that what you've actually experienced is in fact a shamanic initiation. Because most people walking around in this world do not have that connection with the spirit world, whether it's malevolent or benevolent. They don't hear spirits, they don't talk with spirits, they don't interact with spirits in any kind of way, they don't have ongoing relationships with spirits. So if that's you and you're experiencing that, then you've had a shamanic initiation. You've sort of been thrown, for whatever reason, however you got there, you've been thrown into what some people call the astral realm, and you're experiencing these things. And in the astral realm, there's benevolent, but there's also a whole lot of malevolence going on in that realm. So for me, how I work as a shamanic practitioner is I see myself more as a guide, you know, and I tell people, look, I can work and do the work to clear this particular entity or these entities, and do the extraction and move them on, which I can't destroy them. I don't battle them. I don't fight them. You know, spiritual warrior is a very, very strong aspect of my shamanic expression. I feel it, and it's in me. That is a big part of why I'm here. But a lot of people misunderstand what spiritual warriorship really means. You know, they think of it in terms of like battle, good versus evil, and fighting. And no, I don't do that, because as I shared in the last video that I made today, I fundamentally do understand that nothing can be created or destroyed, only transmuted. So that entity, that thing that's existing, that seems malevolent and that we don't like, I didn't create it. I'm not source, nor can I destroy it. There's things that I can do to bind it. There's things I can do to make agreements with it. But how I recently explained it to somebody, it's like a bunch of ants finding a pile of sugar. You know, we can move the pile of sugar somewhere else and encourage the ants to go somewhere else. But I can't destroy the ants, because if that pile of sugar remains there, more ants are going to come, more ants are going to come, and more are going to come, because I'm not the creator. That's just how it works. So we work with what we can. We transmute the energies, we move them on. And part of my shamanic practice is to assist people who've had shamanic awakenings, who've had shamanic initiations, to understand that now you are in the spiritual realm. Now you are in the spirit world. I cannot take that away. I can do extraction all day long for the next 5 years for you, and it's not going to stop the fact that you are having an open psychic connection with the spirit world and you're talking with spirits. I can't change that. What I can help you do is learn how to communicate with helping spirits, benevolent spirits, compassionate spirits, spirits that you're willing and want to work with, and how to guard and protect yourself from the spirits that you don't want to. And so this is where power retrieval comes into play. And it's why I'm saying when shamanic extraction occurs, it can't occur as an a la carte thing. It has to also occur with soul retrieval and power retrieval as well. So it's all combined, and it's just how I work, in a very combined, methodical manner. But I also want to make it clear, when I say that you've had a shamanic initiation, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that you are a shaman. Because to be a shaman is to be in a role, a very specific role, performing services for your community. So if you're not doing that, if you're not in that role, providing services to your community, then you're not a shaman. You may be a shamanic initiate. And as I said in the last video I made earlier today, initiation is a very, very long, difficult process. If you've been dealing with an entity attachment, a malevolent entity attachment that's wearing you down, and you're suffering and you're having these symptoms, and you're going on 10 years, I can tell you that your experience is a shamanic initiation experience. And until you actually transmute that and learn how to allow it to be your teacher, learn how to be in your power, learn how to psychically protect, learn how to develop alliances with helping, compassionate, benevolent spirits, and you start actually offering those services to other people, then you haven't quite reached that level of being a shaman. You're still in the initiation phase. And it's a long, difficult, hard phase. But I cannot shut off. You know, once you're open to the spiritual realm, I can't shut that off. I can't make that go away. It's just not going to happen. And so these 6 people that have come to me with these malevolent entities, you know, or their perception of this, I mean, that's what I would call being initiated into darkness, essentially. That's what that is. That's what it is. That's what it means. You know, it's being initiated into all that muck, that heavy energy, that that malevolence, that negative intent, that kind of torment and oppression and suffering, but it can serve you. It's just a process of transmuting it. And this is where shamanic initiation can go awry, or where it can actually be a failed or pathological initiation, is if somebody goes down that path and they succumb to a lot of the symptoms, depression, and they just get beat down. Maybe they get suicidal. Maybe they ultimately commit suicide, or maybe they turn to drugs or alcohol to cope with the symptoms. This is what we would call a failed initiation, because they've succumbed to it. They haven't allowed the work in transmuting and for the full extraction to take place, and built up their alliances with helping spirits and all that sort of stuff. So it's important, if this is happening to you, to be in a process of transmuting it. And absolutely a shaman can help you with that. But to go to a shaman and expect in an hour session, a shaman is just going to extract this thing, throw it into the river, you're going to be done with it, you're going to go about your life as normal, whatever normal even is. I mean, if you've been dealing with this for 10 or 12 years, what is normal anymore? But that you're just going to go back to life with not having any sort of opening to the spirit world at all anymore, and that you're done with it, that's just completely, entirely unrealistic. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Nobody actually does want to be a shaman, because it's bad news, right? It just means, it's a lot of suffering, it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of transmutation. It's a lot. It's a lot of, self-mastery and diving really deep. But if you're experiencing it, it's probably why you're here. And these experiences are increasing in numbers. For decades and decades and decades in the United States, we've really oppressed our shamanic individuals, and we've put labels on them. A lot of them are mental health labels. And, I'm not saying that all people with mental illness are shamanic, or even shamanic initiates. I'm not saying that at all. And I'm not saying that every shamanic initiate has to have a mental health diagnosis, because that's not accurate either. The two things are mutually exclusive, but they do correlate. And so a lot of times shamanic individuals do get put with mental illness labels because they have been initiated into darkness, or because they are on a path of failed initiation. They don't have that mentor or elder who's come along, that shamanic individual who's come along and helped them transmute that stuff and get the skills and really dig deep into themselves and get that self-mastery and sort of get on that process to transmute it in such a way of being in service to other people. So they get real kind of hunkered down in this victim mentality, and they lose their power. They feel powerless, they feel hopeless. They really, when they come to me, they have no power whatsoever. And they feel like this entity over here is so vast and strong, and they can't fight it, and it has so much power, and they really just are in this position of being powerless. So part of the shamanic path is to be able to come into your power. And that doesn't happen from being cured. It doesn't happen from ripping out this thing and throwing it over there and now you're in your power all of a sudden. It's why I'm saying there's a tending process that has to occur, and it's very interwoven. As they're doing extraction, they should be doing a little bit of soul retrieval. And as they're doing a little bit of soul retrieval, they should also be doing a little bit of power retrieval. And all these things sort of intermix and coalesce and come together to produce, at least hopefully, somebody that's on a very strong shamanic path towards full embodied shamanism. On recognized, conscious, on the path from being an initiate into full acts of service. And the service doesn't have to look exactly the same. There's no cookie cutter. It's not like, well, you have to do it like this. But it's some type of active service to your community. So it's taking this initiated into darkness experience, this shamanic initiation, and transmuting it, coming into your full power, being the embodied shamanic individual, and offering that as a practice to your community, to those people around you that are seeking your help. That is ultimately the goal, because I can't make you not have communications with the spirits anymore. It's just not possible. So that's really all I wanted to talk about today with the entity attachment. It's an interesting thing. It's interesting to me that increasingly more and more people are coming to me asking for entity extraction, and that the cases, the situations, the circumstances, the experience, the symptomology that people are presenting to me is becoming increasingly more complex and difficult, and it's interesting. I'm always learning, and I don't ever see myself not learning. I'm on a learning path. I've talked about this before, about the difference between calling yourself a shaman versus a shamanic practitioner. A lot of people, they prefer the practitioner label. They think that that's more humble, that it more accurately represents. For me, if we call practitioner someone that's still learning, then I will always be a shamanic practitioner. I will never actually graduate to be a shaman because I'm always learning. Each person that comes to me, I learn from them, and I know this is going to continue to be the case. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for these difficult and complex situations that people are bringing to me, because it's teaching me a lot, and I'm just honored that people even come to me and trust me with that. I mean, some of the intimate conversations and depth of soul that I've been able to get with people has been an amazing experience. So if you have questions about entity attachment, or you think that you're struggling, or someone that you care about is struggling with entity attachment, please reach out to me. I'm in no way professing myself to be an expert, but I'm gaining more and more experience every day in this and the complexities of it. And I'm more than happy to talk with you. I typically am doing my sessions now by Zoom, but I'm also happy to chat with you through email, just back and forth a little bit, to help you sort of get a perspective on what you're experiencing or a loved one is experiencing, and maybe help discern it a little bit for you, and offer some guidance, or a direction that you might want to go in getting help in relieving some of those symptoms and transmuting that into a way where it's a positive experience, and you can start working with spirits that are much more compassionate and benevolent and helpers. So thanks as always for watching, and I hope that you guys have a very blessed day. I love you so much.